Hello, this is Chuck Ridgway, Automation Technology Manager at Horner. Thanks for joining us for another Tuesday live stream. Well, today we have a customer requested topic. Here it is. Take control of Horner data logging files. Now, the actual request from the customer was to go over how you can control when data logging files can be created on the Horner controllers. Now, when I went back and looked at the video library of what we've done thus far over the past several years, I found we haven't done a bunch on this channel, certainly not on our Tuesday live streams, on the data logging feature in general. So today we're going to take really a full dive at the data logging feature, but of course, I am going to cover that customer request as part of the topic. Let's get started. Since we are taking the full dive, we're going to give you a full introduction to the Horner data logging feature. We'll describe how it works, we'll go through the workflow, and we'll have lots of demonstrations, including that question that was brought up by the customer. All right, here we go. So Horner data logging, what is it? Well, this is really a feature that we've had at Horner for many years now, and it's become extremely popular recently, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But basically, this is a feature that allows any Horner controller, whether it's an all-in-one OCS product or whether it's one of our CPUs that are our modular controllers, but all the Horner controllers have this feature, which allows them to record machine data as prescribed by the system designer. Okay, and when I say as prescribed, it means the system designer can decide, are the variables going to be recorded on a periodic basis, every 15 seconds, every 5 minutes, that sort of thing, or on an event basis, only when a particular trigger happens in the program. So the system designer has the choice. Now, the data that's recorded is recorded in CSV file format. So that's comma delimited format, which is highly compatible with applications like Microsoft Excel so that you can take a look at your data when you're done. And there's lots of other things you can do with those files as well. So it's a very useful feature to be sure. Now, why is it a useful feature? Now, as we've covered on this channel extensively over the past year for sure, and really even longer than that, customers or users of machines, they want more than just machine control out of their automation. They want machine data as well. The types of machine data they're looking for can include things like validation that the process was in control and they want details on the process. They may want machine efficiency data, historic operations so they can log what's been going on with the machine, diagnostic information. There's just an unlimited amount of machine data that they are interested in, and data logging is really one of the quick and simple ways to get that data to them, without going into any kind of, extensive software work of any kind. All right, so how was the data logging feature designed? Well, in a word, multiple words, I guess, in a phrase, it was designed for ease of use. Okay, that's really what it was all about. One way we kind of joke about the feature is we kind of call it data logging for dummies. Not because our customers are dummies, certainly not, but because it's just such an easy way to log data without really having to go through, without having to jump through a lot of hoops. The file creation is fully automatic after you've set it up in just a few steps. The data is in a spreadsheet format. Your column headers of your spreadsheet are automatically created for you. Your new entries are automatically added, every few seconds if that's what you want it to do, or only on a trigger if that's what you want it to do. And every time you add a new entry, it's time stamped and date stamped, and away you go. So it's really as easy as you could get, we think, for a data logging type feature with quite a bit of functionality. Now, in terms of the limitations on the data logging feature, you can log as many as 100 variables in a project. As many of 30 of those can be logged as a group in a single file. And you can have up to 10 different groups or 10 different data log files that you create in a given project. Okay, if you decide to set up your data logs to be periodic, you can have new entries as fast as once per second. Okay, and for triggered data logs, even though those are often used for event-based type logging, those, if you use event-based triggers, you can have entries as fast as every other scan if you want to do something really, really fast. Now, we're not going to cover doing triggered data logging every other scan. We're going to cover doing triggered data logging the way it's more typically used, which is, only on a specific event, maybe only when a particular sensor turns on or off, that sort of thing. Okay, so one of the things that I mentioned was automatically handled was file creation. Okay, so when are files automatically created using data logging? Well, it depends on how you've set up your data log. Have you set it up to be interval based, where the interval is in terms of seconds? If so, the data logging feature will create a new file every hour. Why does it do that? Well, it does that to keep the file sizes reasonable and maybe to keep you out of trouble, if you will. So you're not looking at humongous files. Now, if you're doing a data log with interval as well, except it's in terms of minutes instead of seconds, well, then you're going to get one new file per day that's created by the feature. So because you're not data logging as frequently, we figure you don't need as many files to keep the file sizes reasonable. And then when you have data logs that are triggered manually, with a trigger bit, if you will, they also are created once per day. Now, when it comes to the files, how are they named and how are they stored? Okay, so first of all, you have your choice between storing your data logging files either on your micro SD drive, which is the default, or on your USB drive, which is specified with drive letter B. Now, on that particular drive, whichever one you choose, the files will be stored in a folder that matches the name of a data log group that you assign as part of the configuration. And then within that data log group folder, you'll find files that are named based on the month, date, and hour, if they are hourly type files. In other words, files created every hour because your interval is every few seconds, or those files are named with year, month, day if they are created daily because you're not, either you're logging on a triggered basis or on a slower interval. Okay, so at runtime, what will happen here? Well, basically, as long as you've configured it properly, it's pretty much a fully automatic operation. Now, when data logging at runtime, the controller will actually log to a RAM buffer first every time it takes a new sample, because that's much more efficient. And then, when convenient, it will actually write the data from the RAM buffer to the memory card. All right. The other benefit of a buffer is that it will prevent data loss in the event that the drive is removed. Now, you can't remove it for an indefinite amount of time, but as long as it's not removed for too long, you shouldn't lose any data. And you can always monitor how full your buffer is, when your memory card's removed, by monitoring a status variable. All right, now let's dive into the workflow. All right. What are the 5 steps? Well, there's 5 steps here, and then there's an option at the end to repeat a few of the steps. So really 5 steps. We're going to enable data logging as a feature. We're going to configure some global attributes. We're going to create groups that we're then going to data log. We're going to configure the attributes for that group. In other words, how often are we going to take samples, for instance? We're going to add variables to the group so we can identify what specifically data-wise we want to log by adding variables to our group. And then if we have multiple groups, we're going to repeat steps 3 through 5. Okay, and you can have as many as 30 variables in any one group and as many as 10 groups in any one project. And another maximum that we covered before, but I'll do it again, a maximum of 100 variables per project as well. Here are the 5 steps specifically. Enable data logging as a feature. That's just a checkbox. Couldn't be simpler. Configure global data logging attributes. What are those? Well, those are assigning a status register or status variable that you can use to monitor the feature in general. We'll show you what that means here in a minute, as well as assigning a global enable variable that has to be on for data logging to be enabled at runtime dynamically. Okay, here's what that global status variable means. There's 2 words to it. The first word basically tells you the status of the media. When we say media, we're talking about USB or micro SD. Very important because it tells you if, for instance, the memory card isn't plugged in. Okay. The second word of the status variable tells you the % full that the memory card currently is. Okay. And these days, with as large as media devices are, it's going to be fairly rare for that memory card to approach being full, but it's a good thing to monitor anyway. Okay, so step 3 in the workflow is to create a group. Remember, a group is the name of a bunch of variables that you are going to data log together. Okay, that's basically what we're talking about here. Okay, and that group name should really have 8 characters or less. Okay, that's very important. All right, step 4, configure the group attributes. What is that? Well, that is assigning another status variable, this time to monitor the buffer where the data log information is being logged to prior to writing to the media. Okay. Next, how often will this group of variables actually be logged? How many samples will we take? Do we take it every second? Do we only take it when we have a trigger bit turn on? That sort of thing. That group status variable I just talked about is also 2 words, just like the global status variable is, and it gives us information on the status of the buffer for each group. Okay, the final step in the process is to add variables to the group that we just created and specified, okay? So you typically are going to do data logging at the end of your project. You've done your machine control, everything's running the way you want, you've identified all your variables, you know what they do, you know the key ones that are needed if you want to record, key process information or diagnostic information, whatever the case may be. So at this point, you add variables to each group that you're going to data log, okay? And these are typically existing variables that you've already created. Now, if you have multiple groups that you want to create, which is pretty typical, you might have one group that you're recording, very frequently on a regular basis. You might have another group that's a different type of data that's recorded on a different set of scenarios, that sort of thing. So you're probably going to have multiple groups that you create. And when you do that, of course, you're going to go back and repeat the steps of creating a group, specifying its attributes, and then adding variables to it. All right, let's go ahead and demonstrate data logging. I've got a sample project here on the screen. I'm simulating a fancy schmancy Pizza-matic 5000 pizza oven here. With my Cscape program. Let's take a look at what it looks like on the bench. You can see I'm kind of simulating a conveyor-based pizza oven here with cook time that's adjustable, temperature that's adjustable. We can monitor the temperature zones, we can monitor the conveyor speed, how many pizzas are currently in the oven, all that sort of thing. And we can turn things on and off with a big ol' on-off switch. Okay, so the whole purpose of this is just to demonstrate what we can do with data logging with something that at least approximates to some really reduced extent a real application. Okay, so let's go back to Cscape and let's go ahead and do some data logging. We're going to start with probably the most common type of data logging, and that is data logging based on an interval. In other words, we're going to data log variables every so many minutes, every so many seconds, that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and get that set up. All right, to find data logging, we're going to be here at the main Home tab at the top of Cscape 10, and we're going to go to Data Logging and select that here. Okay, now we'll go through that workflow that I just reviewed with you a few minutes ago. We're going to enable data logging in general. And then we need to assign some global attributes. Okay, now I had previously done this when I was setting things up, so these variables are already in here, but normally you'd be entering variables in from scratch. So we've got our global status variable, which is 2 consecutive words. That will tell us things like how full is the media and are there any errors with the media? Or, it'll also tell us, I believe, if somebody removes the memory card, for instance. And then we've got a global enable register. So in order for the controller to do any data logging at all, this bit type or Boolean variable will have to be a 1. So we're going to have to turn that on in order for data logging to commence, if you will. Okay, no matter what type of data logging we're doing, whether it's interval based or whether it's based on a trigger, for instance. Okay, so we have assigned our global attributes after enable data logging as a feature. Now let's go ahead and add a group. Okay, that's the next step. So I'm going to highlight this folder here, hit the add group button, and I'm going to call this process. I could call it whatever I want 8 digits, okay, 8 alphanumeric digits on the group name. And I would just stick with alphabetical, at least to start. Okay, so I'm going to go with process as my group name. Okay, so I've created a group. Now I'm going to next assign some group attributes for the variables that ultimately will be logged. You know, how often am I going to log? Do I need a status register? All those sorts of things. Okay, so let's go ahead and assign our status register. Okay, I believe I have one ready to go here. Yep, here's one called process dlog status. And I'm going to point at the first of 2 consecutive words in that array type variable. And then I'm going to basically log periodically. And I'm going to do it every 15 seconds for this example. Okay. Now, in terms of data log path, by default, all the data log files that are going to be automatically created by the controller are going to be placed in a folder which has the same name as the group, which in our case is process. If I want that to be, further down in the directory structure, then I can add a path above where the process folder will be located. But I'm going to go ahead and just leave it at the top level or the root level and not worry about it. Here's where I can change my date and time formats based on what I'm wanting to display in my data log file. And for all intents and purposes, I'm done defining the group attributes for this particular data log. Now, what I haven't done is a very important step, and that is I haven't added any variables to be logged. So we need to do that now. Okay, so in this case, let's say that we're primarily interested in, the temperatures of the zones. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start adding those in. Let's go ahead and browse our tags. There we go. Oven temp zone 1. Let's add that in. Let's go ahead and add all 4 zones in here. Okay, so there's zone 2. And I can mix and match whatever type of variables I want. They don't all have to be the same type or anything like that. Just so happens the first 4 that I'm adding here are all of the real type for these zone temperatures that I'm adding. All right, and I can add as many as 30 variables to a group. Now let's go ahead also and add a variable for whether the oven is actually on or not. Okay, so let's go up here to Boolean and let's find the oven on variable. I believe we have one of those here. Okay, let's take a look. There we go, oven on. All right, so as you can see, you can even data log Boolean variables, and they'll show up as either on or off in your spreadsheet file. Okay, so these are the variables we're going to add to our group called process that we're then going to log. And basically, this is going to log every 15 seconds, provided that data logging is enabled under the global attribute variable here. Okay, so under global attributes, there is an enable data logging bit that has to be on before we're going to do any data logging. So in our program, I'm going to need to make sure that that is on. And then as soon as I download this, effectively, if the controller's in run and that, enable bit is on here under global attributes, then we're just going to start logging data every 15 seconds. Okay, now, because this particular group the interval is in seconds, because it's in seconds, the OCS at runtime or the controller at runtime is going to automatically create its file every hour. Okay, so if data logging is enabled, and when data logging is first enabled, we're going to create a new file. Okay, assuming one hasn't already been created this hour, and then at the top of every hour after that, we're going to create a new file. And why is that? Well, the whole idea here is to keep you out of trouble. And if you're taking data as quickly or as often as every few seconds, or maybe even once a second, then we're trying to keep the files from getting too huge. So that's why we're creating a new file every hour. Okay, so this is the setup that we're going to use for this first demonstration. And I'll go ahead and download this, and then we'll take a look at the result. All right, I've now downloaded the program with our data log configuration included. And here we go. Let's take a look at what we have here. So if we go take a look at the micro SD card, I've added a removable media device here so I can quickly look at what's happening on the card. You don't see any kind of folder that talks anything about process, which would be where our data log files would be. And that's because we haven't actually enabled data logging yet. So in this particular demonstration, I can enable data logging from here. All right, so I've now enabled data logging, and now let's go back and take a look at our micro SD drive and see if we have that folder created yet. Okay, and sure enough, there we go. We have a process folder. You can see that's been created, which is where our data log files are going to be contained. If we click on that folder, there it is. We can see the name of the file that's based on today's date. Now remember, you're watching this, almost a couple weeks after I recorded it. So I recorded it here on November the 13th, because as you know, this week, as you're watching this, I am currently in Germany at the Nuremberg show. But anyway, so we've got our file present there, and it's in the exact directory where we would expect it to be, the process folder on the micro SD card, because when we created this data log, we did not specify the B drive, which would be USB. We just left that path alone, which meant it defaulted to the default drive, which is micro SD. Okay, so we've created our file. A little bit later, we'll take a look at what that file looks like once it's got some entries in it from taking data every 15 seconds. Through the magic of editing, here's what things look like once I have moved my memory card over to my computer and opened the CSV file. There's that file name we were looking at based on today's date and time. And as you can see here, we have data. So here's our date stamp, our time stamp, and then the temperature values that are floating point values for the 4 oven zones, along with the oven on Boolean that we have recorded here. And we obviously pulled the card after, just a few minutes, taking data every 15 seconds. Okay, so that first round of setting up a data log that's based on an interval, pretty simple stuff. Now, before we dive into our demonstration of a triggered data log, I'm just going to show you how the buffering works. Now, from our first demonstration, if you remember, I pulled the memory card out and I popped it in my computer. Well, while I was doing that, and I still have that data card removed, by the way, you can see that the buffer is slowly slowly filling up. Currently we're at 4% full on the buffer with the media card not present. You can see the status there. So you can certainly get away with not having the media card installed at least for a period of time, depending again on how often you're taking data and how much data you're actually logging, per sample, if you will. So it is very handy to have that buffering going on for a lot of reasons, including being able to overcome times when the memory card isn't installed. Now back to Cscape, and let's do that demonstration of a triggered data log. Okay, so what we're going to do with our pizza oven is, let's go back and take a look at the pizza oven screen. We've got a sensor that senses whenever a pizza is placed in the oven, and also another sensor that senses when a pizza is removed from the oven. So what we're going to do is, let's go ahead and trigger a data log anytime either the entry sensor or the exit sensor turn on. Let's go ahead and trigger an actual data log. So to do that, because there's 2 different conditions that can cause a data log to be gathered, we're going to need just a little bit of logic. Okay, so I've got a little bit of logic here that says if either of the sensors are tripped, we're going to go ahead and turn on this bit that I've created called pizza log, where we're going to log what's happening at that time. Okay, so let's head back to data logging. And what we're going to do here, we've already enabled data logging, of course, because we've already got data logging happening on an interval basis with a different group. We've already set our global attributes, so that doesn't need to be changed. The next step is we need to add another group. So let's go ahead and call this group pizzas. Okay, plural, why not? Okay, and we need to set the the group attributes for the pizzas group. Okay, so we need to assign a status register. I'll just give it a name. Let's call it pizzas dlog status. All right, and this is two 16-bit words. So as I've created this new variable, I need to give it a dimension of 2. Okay, all right, so there's my status address. Now, we're not going to be taking data every second. Okay, we're going to be taking it on a triggered basis only. Okay, we'll go ahead and keep the path the same. All right, and we need to assign a trigger variable now. So let's go ahead and find that bit that I just created, or created a little while ago, called pizza log. Okay, so when that bit turns on, we're going to take a sample. All right, so we've configured our group attributes. Now we need to add variables. And what variables do we want to log here? Well, it could be completely different variables. It could be the same variables. It could be whatever you want. Okay, but let's go ahead and add some variables here. And I'm going to go ahead and let's see, let's log pizzas in oven. I think I have, yeah, there we go. I have a integer variable called pizzas in oven. So we'll just go ahead and log how many pizzas are currently in the oven with this transaction that we're recording here. Let's go ahead and add conveyor speed. Why not? Okay, so we have another integer that is a conveyor speed variable. There we go, conveyor speed in inches per minute, which is another integer. And let's go ahead and add those four, or at least let's just say we're going to add, for the sake of speed here, let's just go ahead and add 2 of the oven temperature zones here. Okay, let's add the first zone and let's add the last zone. All right, again, just to speed this up a bit. All right. And again, in a real application, we could have as many as 30 variables in a group and as many as 100 total variables between all groups combined, and we can have as many as 10 groups. So those are kind of our limitations here. Okay, so just to quickly review, we've created a group called pizzas. Here's the variables that are in it. Our group attributes are triggered only whenever the pizza log Boolean turns on. Okay, so I'll go ahead and download this, and then let's take a look at the result. We've now downloaded. Now let's test it out. All right, so once again, what we're going to do with this round of data logging is every time we have either a pizza enter the oven or exit the oven and these switches transition, we've got a bit inside of our program that's going to trigger to cause a data log to be created, basically, or a data log to be logged, if you will. Okay, so let's go here, make sure data logging's enabled. All right, we don't have any pizzas in the oven. We shouldn't have done any transitions yet of the trigger. So yeah, sure enough, we only have our process folder. We don't have the pizzas folder. All right, so let's go back here. Again, verify one more time. Yep, our data logging is enabled. Let's go ahead and put a pizza in the oven. All right, so that should have created a new folder, and sure enough, it did. We've got a pizzas folder now. And yes, it does have a file inside of it. That's terrific. Okay, let's go ahead and trigger a couple more pizzas. All right. And that should give us 3 entries. And just for grins, let's pretend one of them is heading out already. So effectively now we should have 4 transitions that were logged. All right, so I'll go ahead and pull the card and we'll take a look at the data log file. I've moved the disk and opened the file. As you can see, by default, the columns are in a fairly, not wide state when they're first opened in Excel. So I'm going to widen those out here, and we can see, sure enough, we've got 4 different entries in our log, which is what we would have expected from the 4 transitions that we did, and everything came through as planned. For our last demonstration, I'm going to show you a trick for those folks who would like to minimize the number of files that are created for a data log that is taking data very frequently. So let's revisit our process group here that we created in our first demo. Okay, so when we take a look at the group attributes, We've set our interval at 15 seconds. And because our interval is in seconds, the OCS data logging feature is going to automatically create a new file every hour. That's just to try and keep you out of trouble. But if you're okay with just one file per day and you want to force that to happen, then what you would need to do is to trick the OCS a little bit. How would you do that? Well, basically, so you would get rid of your seconds-based logging, change it to triggered logging only, okay? And then let's go ahead and find a variable that I just created called dlog 15-second tick, okay? And what is that? Well, that's an internal variable that I have created that is going to turn on every 15 seconds. So we're only doing triggered logging, but that trigger is happening every 15 seconds. So we're still going to get a new entry every 15 seconds. But because it's triggered logging, we're only going to create one new file a day with the data logging feature. So that's a way you can get around that, hourly file creation default for the data logging feature. Now, keep in mind, if you're taking data very frequently, then you're going to potentially end up with some pretty large files. You don't have to worry about any kind of, filling up your memory card type scenario, but you could end up with some pretty large files if, those triggers are happening pretty frequently. They're not going to be ginormous like video files or anything like that, but they will be much larger than if they were just containing data for an hour. Okay, so that was a little trick I wanted to show you in terms of how to change that file default, or at least trick it. And here's just that simple logic that I did to create a tick every 15 seconds. That does it for our content for today. If you're interested in training, we've got a couple of courses scheduled for February and March. That's a basic and advanced course respectively. You can go to our website and sign up today. Speaking of our website, that's one of the ways that you can interact with Horner Automation. You can also do so on our YouTube channel, where you'll find this video and hundreds of others, as well as interact with us on LinkedIn. We're pretty active there. Okay, so right now, this is going to get confusing, but right now I'm actually in Germany at the Nuremberg trade show. So I pre-recorded this video so I could be there live. Hopefully, maybe by now you've even seen some short little vlog type videos with my progress as I head over to Nuremberg. But the whole point of this is that we'll be delivering a Tuesday live stream, pre-recorded of course, from Nuremberg, which I consider the biggest PLC trade show in the world. So we think we'll have some good info for you. You can see what's new. You can see what's going on with Horner Europe. Hopefully it'll be a really interesting show, and we'd love you to join us. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, don't hesitate to do so. It doesn't cost anything. And if you choose notifications when you subscribe, you'll be notified every time we go live or every time we post a new video. Okay, so until next week, when we bring you our Nuremberg show, let's get out there and do some good.